Downing Street if David Cameron still thinks UKIP are mostly closet racists. They called back to say no, he doesn't. After that spread on social media, they rang back to say they were not retracting the original comments after all. So tonight it isn't clear what the Prime Minister actually thinks of UKIP. In between those calls, I spoke to the leader of the party, Nigel Farage, from Rotherham. David Cameron no longer believes that UKIP are mostly closet racists. Do you think he's to blame at all for what's happened?
I think the entire political class, both Labour, Lib Dem and Conservatives, have all, since we opened the doors in 2004 and said to people in Eastern Europe, as many of you that want to come can, they've all tried to dampen down debate on this by throwing out the word racist in an attempt to stop anybody having a proper conversation on this issue. And I think they now realise today that the game is up. And I'm delighted that David Cameron no longer thinks we're closet racists. I think I may even go out and celebrate this evening on the strength of that. But what we need to do now is to move on and to discuss the fact that on the 1st of January 2014, we're opening the doors to 29 million people from Romania and Bulgaria, countries that are even poorer than the previous East European countries that have joined. And I really do believe we must have a debate on this.
Do you think Britain's multicultural society and multiculturalism is a bad thing?
Depends what you mean by that. You know, a multiracial society can be harmonious, successful, and in most parts of this country it is. What we've, I'm afraid, had in the last few years are very large numbers of people coming to Britain who don't even speak English. When you have that situation, there is no chance of integration happening within our towns and cities, and we finish up with a more divided society. That is not the route for Britain to go down.
So do you understand at all anyone who says, if you hold those views, if you think there are too many Eastern Europeans in Britain, if you think multiculturalism is a bad thing, it may not be entirely good for, hypothetically, a group of Eastern European children who perhaps don't speak English very well, brought to this country to be brought up by somebody who holds those views?
I'm sorry, we are a non-racist, non-sectarian political party.
I'm not saying you're racist. I'm saying, based on the views you've just told me,
yes,
about there being too many immigrants, about being unwise to have more, you know, as many coming in as there are, and about the dangers of multiculturalism, that any of that might be difficult to hear if you are a child from Romania, say.
No, not at all.
Being brought up by someone who holds those views.
No, not at all.
It might be a bit awkward for you, mightn't it?
I don't think so at all. I think somebody that holds the view that all of us that live legally in this country should speak the same language, get on together, integrate, and become part of one society is actually even a stronger reason for somebody that holds those views to adopt or to be a foster parent, because they will be absolutely determined to make sure those children learn the language and flourish at school.
You see, if David Cameron was calling you a closet racist until today, and if Michael Howard was saying you're all extremists, or lots of you are extremists, it's no wonder that, you know, a social worker might have alarm bells ringing, is it? It might not be the social worker's fault that an alarm went off when they heard UKIP, given what very senior politicians have been saying about UKIP.
I agree. The real villains of the piece are the leaders of the Labour and Conservative parties who have vilified UKIP for all that we've stood for, who've attempted to close down debate on open-door immigration, and who still refuse to have a proper debate about the fact that we're about to open the door even wider to Romania and Bulgaria. And what I want from this is not just an apology from David Cameron, not just an admission from Ed Miliband that their policy was a mistake. What I want from this are these people to be given back their full fostering rights, to be given back the 3 children who, by the way, were learning English and were doing very, very well. And I want, you know, their records to be absolutely cleared so they can carry on doing what they've been doing very well.
You see, well, what feels a little distasteful to some people about this whole story is that it all seems wrapped up with a by-election, that UKIP could benefit from this, that's why the Conservatives and the Labour Party have been leaping on it as an issue and saying that, you know, that on the face of it, it seems indefensible, and that people, all of you, are playing politics with the lives of 3 vulnerable young children.
I will not have that. I was first alerted to this story on Tuesday, and my concern since Tuesday has been how can these people clear their name and get back on the fostering register. These events only took place last week. It was last week the children were removed. That timing isn't my timing. It isn't UKIP's timing. That was the timing chosen by Rotherham Council.
And as you can see, Nigel Farage, Anna Soubry and Trevor Phillips are all still here on the famous or notorious sofa.
Rainbow Alliance.
Rainbow Alliance. Trevor, as a former boss of the Equalities Commission, are you at all worried about the things that UKIP have been saying?
Well, I was worried about one thing that Nigel said this morning, that you have more minority voters than the Conservative. That's fantasy. It's just.
They were the opinion polls the other day.
No. Well, I do the number crunching. I'll send it to you. But I am a bit worried about not so much about Nigel himself, but some of what his party and the conversation about his party has provoked. I mean, I'm not going to let's be clear, I'm not going to say they're racist and all that stuff. You've probably got racists in the party, but so has every party. I think there is a problem that's arising, though, which is that the use of the epithet racist to cover behaviour that goes from being disobliging about Mexicans through some of the things that political parties say about immigration, right across the street murders, I think is beginning to be a problem. It's depriving the word of its moral force.
I think I agree with
and I do worry about the debate being conducted in that way.
Well, we came to a point in the last fortnight of that campaign where we made the argument that it's irresponsible to have a total open door for 485 million people to come and live in Britain, and that we should have, controlled immigration on numbers and quality, and that in itself became deemed to be racist, which clearly is wrong.
I think the danger is that it stirs up feelings which I certainly find deeply offensive and very troubling. And I see it on the doorstep in my own constituency and when I go into others as well. And people say things which I don't think represents this country.
But
the counter-argument is, should we have an open door?
I'm so sorry.
Well, we don't.
We have run out of time. Ladies and gentlemen,
regarding discrimination are outdated.
Well, I said no such thing. What I said was, two things here. Firstly, and this was an interview, by the way, done 6 months ago, so I was quite shocked to hear it this morning. I'd forgotten about it. The first thing I said was that we've never before had a migrant group come to Britain who've tried to change our culture, and unfortunately there are a small number in the Muslim community who genuinely want to introduce Sharia law to Britain, etc. So I think that's a wholly uncontroversial comment. The second thing I was saying was this. With small businesses, there are nearly 5 million of them, and they are a massively important part of our economy. They feel very, very pressured by continued legislation, and in many cases actually fearful of taking on staff. And what I said is this: I think that if a British employer, a small business, wants to employ a British person over somebody from Poland, they should be able to do that without fear that they contravene discrimination laws. That's all I've said.
You are quoted as saying, there's no previous experience in our history of a migrant group that comes to Britain that fundamentally wants to change who we are and what we are. In what way do Muslims in this country want to do that, Mr. Farage?
I'll just give you a personal example of a taxi driver that I called a taxi home from Hertfordshire with about 18 months ago. Very bright, well-educated, terribly nice fella. I sat in the front with him. He told me, your society in Britain is rotten. It needs changing. We are going to take over and introduce Sharia law. Now, I'm very pleased to say, Nick, there's only a very small number of people that say those things, but there are some of them. And we've only got to look at the British-born people, British-born passport holders who've been going out to fight for ISIS.
Yes, but Mr. Farage, you currently lead a party that has the commendable 14% rating in the polls for an upcoming general election. You seem to be basing a policy on the views of one taxi driver in Hertfordshire. How wise is that?
There are between 500 and 1,000 young British people who have left this country to go and fight for ISIS. We have seen, not just in Britain, but in other parts of Europe too, some really horrendous things happen over the course of the last couple of months. There is a problem. Now, if people want to bury their head in the sands and pretend there isn't a problem, that's up to them. All I'm saying is that this is something that is of great concern, and I will bet, the vast majority of people listening to this right now are concerned.
When the police say that if they have two candidates presented to them, one of whom is white, one of whom is non-white, the non-white should get preference because that is the way to have a police force or service that represents those that they are put in positions to serve, how do you respond?
Well, I think this country, of all the countries in Europe, is the one that has made the most astonishing progress in terms of the removal of discrimination. And rather than beating ourselves up the whole time, we should probably celebrate the fact that we've got a very fair and equitable society. And I don't think we should have legislation that tries to divide people. I think we should have legislation that is colourblind and fair.
And yet you will, I'm sure, be aware that this week it was reported that young males from ethnic minority backgrounds have been jobless for more than a year. The figure's risen by 49%. Surely your suggestion that we don't need that we need racial discrimination laws no longer in the workplace would just fuel that figure, Mr. Farage.
No group of people has suffered more from the wave of unskilled migration that has come in from southern and eastern Europe than the black community, particularly in many parts of London, where they have found themselves, British passport holders, and they found themselves displaced by labour coming from whether it's Poland or wherever else it is. And what I'm saying is that I do think employers should be able to make a presumption in favour of employing British people.
And currently they can't.
Well, they can, but there's always the fear of have they breached discrimination rules? And a number of times I've spoken to small businesses and said, well, how's it going? Yeah, it's going really well. And I say, so you're going to start employing people? Oh, no, forget it. I haven't got time. I don't want the industrial tribunal. I don't want the aggro. This is a very, very big problem, is that small businesses perceive that as soon as they get into the world of employing people, they will find themselves with legal bills and, as I say, industrial tribunals.
So this is more British-born applicants as opposed to born elsewhere in Europe, rather than a white v black thing as it is being portrayed. I'm sorry, Mr. Farage, I have to say, in some papers it's being portrayed as a white v black thing.
Yes, this is not a white v black thing at all. I've made no comment at all on that.
Nigel Farage, what I would like to know is how can you have the audacity to use such blatant scaremongering tactics for the Leave campaign in light of the recent horrific sexual assaults in Germany? You have basically suggested that a vote to remain is a vote for British women to be subdued to the same horrific assaults.
Well, just calm down there a little bit, all right? Because no. But I mean, sometimes in life, what it says at the top of a newspaper page and what you've actually said can be slightly different things. Look, I'm used to being demonised because I've taken on the establishment. And I have just let me finish. And I have, when I first suggested we should have an Australian-style points system, I mean, you'd think I'd said something dreadful. And now I'm pleased to say lots of people are saying it.
I don't think that's
what I said about Cologne was that it's a huge issue in Germany. It's a huge issue in Sweden. I think Angela Merkel has made a big mistake by saying, please anyone come. And what's happened is a very large number of young single males have settled in Germany and in Sweden who come from cultures where attitudes towards women are different. I haven't scaremongered in any way at all.
Are you not embarrassed that Justin Welby today said that you're legitimising racism?
Well, I'm sorry, and I'm not going to stand here and attack the Archbishop of Canterbury, but I think he would have done better to have read actually what I said. Headline was, and he would do well to see what the head of the Roman Catholic Church in Germany has said, because he's made some very robust comments.
But you're targeting a certain group of people and using them as bait to prey upon British people's rational fears about mass migration.
I'm sorry, this is an issue for the future. It is a tiddly little issue as far as I'm concerned in this election campaign. But I knew that at some point in this campaign, the Remainers would come for me and would try and conflate something I'd said out of all proportion.
May I just ask?
I do believe in border controls. I do believe we need to have a sensible, balanced migration policy, and I do believe Germany have made a bad mistake.
We're going to stay on this issue and go to Emeril Morgan alongside Tola there, and a question also for Mr. Farage.
Hi, Nigel. I know a lot of people, I have access to a predominantly black British audience, and a lot of the concerns that they have raised alongside concerns that I have myself is that you are going to increase the fear and discrimination of black British people through your anti-immigration rhetoric.
Well,
are you encouraging racism?
I don't think you could be more wrong, and here's why.
Well, how are you going to safeguard that is essentially what I want to know.
And here's why. I take a very strongly pro-Commonwealth view. I think it was very bad and wrong of us to turn our backs on the Commonwealth in favour of a European political project, and we've made a bad mistake. So now what we do is, if you've got a qualification and you come from India or you come from parts of Africa, you now find it very, very difficult to get into this country despite the historical, strong...
You're still anti-immigration, so I don't see...
I won't have that.
You are anti-immigration.
No,
you use scaremongering and inflammatory comments in your campaign that have gone against people that look non-white. How are non-white British people going to stop facing discrimination about their identity and nationality in this country? That is what I really want to know.
I'm sorry. Well, I tell you what, if you want to think that, and you don't
think that. That's the majority of people that look black, British or non-white.
Well, lots of them
those concerns are very real
can
concerns,
I tell you,
and you're dismissing them.
Can I tell you that lots of them voted for my party in the last election?
Did they?
Stand for us as candidates.
Did they? Can I see the evidence? On what number?
And you're not listening, are you?
How much of the 3% voted for UKIP?
I can't do a lot unless I'm allowed to talk.
She's put a very clear question to you.
Look, I'm explaining to you that I take a view that is strongly pro-Commonwealth. If we have an Australian-style point system rather than an open door to 508 million people, then actually it'll be better for black people coming into Britain who currently find it very difficult because we have this open door. And I would also say this to you, that once again, this attempt to demonise the Leave campaign or me, actually, there is big support for this amongst the ethnic minorities in this country who know that actually our current open border policy is damaging all of our communities. And here's our chance, maybe our one and only chance as a nation to get a grip on this issue.
Certainly arguing that much equalities legislation was no longer needed because we as a country had moved on and that many of the problems of racism that had been endemic in British society 40 or so years ago were no longer such an issue. Now he is saying, actually, I'm just talking about employment legislation, an entirely different matter. His argument, he says, is purely about allowing employers to discriminate in favour of British-born workers, be they black or white, against migrant workers. The argument, he says, is about employment law, not equalities law. But when he was on the Channel 4 documentary programme, he was asked pretty clearly whether he thought it was necessary to have laws barring discrimination on the grounds of race or colour, and this is what he said.
So, in UKIP land, there would be no law against discrimination on the grounds of nationality. Would there be a law against discrimination on the grounds of race or colour?
No. We are colourblind. We as a party are colourblind.
We have these laws for a reason, you know. Before we had these laws, people would discriminate in favour of their families, and people like them.
Yes.
And that led to, by the way, incompetence. Never mind the fairness question. People were employing people who couldn't do the job just because they looked like the employer.
If we'd sat here 40 years ago having this conversation, your point would probably have been valid. I don't think it is today. I really don't think it is today.
Well, now Mr. Farage is saying he's not interested in scrapping the Race Relations Act or getting rid of equalities legislation. What he's talking about is employment law, and I imagined EU employment law. This is what he said.
What the law doesn't do is to protect British workers, both black and white, who find themselves now really struggling in the workplace. And what I'm saying is that employers should be able to employ British people over somebody from Poland without fearing they breached discrimination rules.
Do you have any evidence at all that employers would pick British people? Surely they pick the cheapest hard-working, and that is why they're picking people who are British.
Well, it's certainly true that uncontrolled mass migration from southern and eastern Europe has driven down the price of labour and has led to increasing unemployment in Britain, particularly amongst the young black community, where in parts of London now nearly 50% of them find themselves unemployed. I want to change the law so there is a presumption in favour of British workers. I am not talking about changing the Race Relations Act in this country or anything of the kind. This is a presumption in favour of young black and white British people.
So you're saying your intention is, in some cases, to get a job for a young black Caribbean chap over the white Polish immigrant?
Yeah, that's right. I think we have a duty in this country to do our very best to make sure that our own people get jobs first.
But removing discrimination laws, you then can't control how people behave.
Well, I'm not talking about abolishing race relations in this country. I'm talking about lightening employment legislation so that small employers, and don't forget there are only 5 million small businesses in Britain, are less fearful of taking on young British workers.
You say your kids don't know about race. Do you really think it's gone away to that extent?
I think we as a country beat ourselves up on this whole issue of race. The reality is the world has moved on from 50 years ago when we brought this legislation in. We are the freest and easiest country and most relaxed country in the whole of Europe on the issue of race.
Sadiq Khan finds what you're saying unbelievable. He thinks we have moved on, but we've got a very long way to go. If you remove these laws, you really cannot control how people will act.
Well, Sadiq Khan is in favour of an open labour market with hundreds of millions of people in the European Union. And so he believes they must all be treated equally. I don't believe that. I think we should treat British people and give them better and bigger opportunities.
On the Muslim and Islamophobic question, you are riding a wave. You may be creating and riding a wave of Islamophobia. Talk of fifth column doesn't help that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I reject that completely. What I've said is this is the first ever migrant population that has come to this country that have within it a small number of people who actually want to get rid of our culture, destroy it, and replace it with Sharia law. And we've never faced this prospect before, and that is deeply concerning to the British people. I would have thought that's one of the least controversial things I've ever said.
Do you think you're riding a wave of Islamophobia?
No, certainly not. We've got Muslim people, members of UKIP, candidates for UKIP. This is not about that. This is about defending our Judeo-Christian values in this country.
Lastly, you sent a tweet back to Sadiq Khan talking about, upset that he spoke at a Cage event. It seems to have been withdrawn. What's happening there today?
There is some confusion over this. He certainly shared a stage with Cage. Whether they sponsored it or not is a little bit murky. But either way, what we've seen today is a willful misinterpretation by both senior Conservative and Labour politicians about what I have said. I am not proposing abolishing the race relations laws in Britain, but I am about relaxing employment laws to give young, unemployed, black and white British people a better chance of getting work.
Do you think you're going to come first still in this election, in the European election?
Now, that's a very good question.
Are you going to?
Yes.
You're still making that commitment today?
Yes.
Do you think the last few days have done you damage, done the party damage?
No, because actually, the establishment rounding and accusing me of being racist, the British public know I'm not that. I never have been, I never will be. And I think in some ways, what people see is virtually a witch hunt that's been going on against me and against UKIP. And I think in many cases, that's stiffened their resolve. Let's send the establishment a message. We're not stupid. We can make our own minds up.
So you think you're the victim in all this?
I think that there has been a disproportionate level of criticism of UKIP and UKIP people. There is a criminal gang problem in Romania, a post-communist country that has not made the full transition to Western democracy. I've been to that country. I've seen how 3 million people, the Roma population, are discriminated against in a way that I think if British people really knew, they'd be horrified by, and they certainly wouldn't want us to be in a political union. I've got no problem with Romanians, but I have a problem with the state of Romania and the way it treats its own people. The working communities in this country, and it's given all of that up in favour of an open door to Southern and Eastern Europe.
But isn't that racist?
I don't think it is, no. I don't think it is. I don't think it can be deemed as such in any way. We've never in our history had a complete open door, and now we have one to 485 million people. I don't think in terms of common sense that really adds up.
But if you are a racist, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, it means that you are showing the belief that a particular race is superior to another. And presumably, if you're saying that British people should have jobs above East Europeans, you're suggesting that they're superior. And as a result, that's racist.
Well, actually, this is a big argument in London amongst the Afro-Caribbean community, 50% of whose youngsters haven't got jobs. And that same survey that was done recently showed over 60% of the settled ethnic minorities in this country also believe we've got to have some degree of control. So this crosses all boundaries within this country.
OK, but you're getting bogged down in the figures again. And as I said, remember what happened to Mr Clegg when he did that. Yeah. I've given you the definition of racist.
Well, yeah.
You told me what you thought about the fact that British workers should have a superior chance of getting a job above European workers, whether they're from Eastern Europe or whatever. And that is quite simply a racist comment.
No, it isn't. It is the job of a British government, firstly, to defend the realm, and secondly, to put the interests of the people that live in this country first. That's what we should be doing, and I'm afraid we've turned our backs on that over the course of the last few years, which has led to much, much unhappiness among millions of families.
What should happen to lots of victims yesterday, the woman who blew the whistle 16 years ago? They say they don't want race being brought into this, that they don't want Rotherham tarred with that brush, that politicians coming in and dividing the town.
Would Channel 4 News argue that race is not an issue at all in this? After all, the reason that the blind eye was turned is because race was an issue. Had these offenders been from a different race, I suspect more would have been done earlier. And I think that, you know, that is not an extraordinary thing to say. That is pretty much an accepted fact. Today's a classic day of misinterpretation of what Nigel Farage says. We've even got the Prime Minister tweeting out at me how disgraceful I am for what I've said in an interview that I did over 6 months ago with Trevor Phillips. To be honest with you, I'd even forgotten about the interview. So far from seeking attention, I was a bit surprised to see this as a big story this morning. What I'm saying is very simple. I'm saying that I think British companies should be allowed the presumption of favouring British applicants for jobs over those from Southern and Eastern Europe. And this has been a call for the relaxation of current employment legislation. And somehow that's been twisted into me saying I want to abolish the Race Relations Act from the 1960s. I don't. But I do think the pressures on employers are too great, and we're now heading down a road, actually, of quotas. So let's just think for once about the 5 million small businesses in Britain, and let's think about all the unemployed youngsters in Britain, both black and white. They deserve an even break. I don't care what you call us. You can call us right-wing, left-wing. You can call us small-minded. You can call us whatever you like. I don't care what you call us. But from this moment on, please, do not ever call us a racist party. We are not a racist party.